Hey, okay, hopefully the sound is working. Let me see. So yeah, I hope this space is working. I'm not too sure, but we'll see. So this is the last chapter of Tip of the Spear. And my voice might be a little dry here and there because I'm actually sick and been sick for, I think this is day 7. It's wild, but the times we live in. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my PDF, and then there's going to be a brief pause in the recording, and then in about a minute or two, you'll hear I'll start reading the book. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start reading. Hopefully I'm coming through sound-wise, but we'll see. So again, I'm sick, so it's probably not going to be too much commentary. But yeah, so this is chapter 6, the war on Black revolutionary minds. And again, I'm going to put a thread together where you should be able to listen to the book full, like all the way through. So the war on Black minds, the war on Black revolutionary minds, failed experiments in scientific subjugation. Dear Governor Rockefeller, please accept my congratulations upon your patience, compassion, courage, and fortitude in dealing with the tragic events at Attica. Thus begins a letter authored 4 days after the governor had authorized an incursion of Attica prison, during which a state assault force massacred at least 29 rebelling captives and sexually tortured hundreds of others. Its author, Dr. Robert J. Galati, showered Rockefeller with praise, even though it had recently been revealed that his armed agents, and not the rebels, had been previously reported, had also killed 10 white prison guards who had been taken hostage. Pause right there. I already lied and said there wouldn't be commentary, but it's interesting because for those who will listen to this recording, we're actually living through, another stage of the genocide going on at the hands of the Zionists against Palestinian people. And a lot of the reports have come out and said, that the Palestinian resistance is killing hostages and woo-de-woo, or that we had to kill and bomb hundreds of people just so that we can rescue 4 people or 3 or whatever the fuck, right? Any given story that they give out. Anyways, I bring that up because the same tactics, the same propaganda is used when squashing rebellion in their imperial core, and in this case, within prisons. And then I urge us to realize that, and then to start seeing prisons for what they are. They're not here to protect us, the people. They're actually here that's part of our repression. That's part of our ongoing genocide here as Black people in the imperial core. But then also too, that's also the modus operatum of empire. So look at these prisons as systems of concentration camps. meant to house the overflow, which is the too poor to work or disabled, or those who refuse to work and slave away for corporations. It's meant to house them. But then it's also meant to house anybody who resists this white supremacist capitalist system. And when we look at it like that, when we see the parallels with what's going on with the genocide in Palestine at the hand of the Zionists, and we're like, wait a minute, they do this exact same thing. Well, the reason why is because it's a collective project of white hegemony and the ongoing apocalypse of settler colonialism. So I'll keep reading. Again, I'm sick, so I probably won't talk that much or have commentary that much. All right, so we just read the part where Dr. Galati had just congratulated Rockefeller on a job well done, even with the facts coming out that it was actually the guards who killed the hostages and not the rebels. So, like Rockefeller, Galati saw this collateral damage as an acceptable loss, incurred in the process of quelling an existential threat to civilization. I'm gonna keep reading because, but for real. So, like, basically, they saw the killing of those hostages as just collateral damage, as necessary acts of war, and this is them describing the uprising of the rebels in Attica. And doesn't that sound like the propaganda of war, or the mindset of war, the mindset of the colonizer within again continuing the settler apocalypse? And I guess I keep harping on this because I really need us to change the way in which we see prisons, because I think once that mindset is also flipped, we will also see our conditions as being a part of a protracted war. And it won't be so hard to understand and to accept that we live in the times that we need to rebel. So after praising God for the governor's resolute action, Galati got to the reason for his letter. The notion that, quote, we now have two kinds of prisoners that we must deal with, and we need separate programs for each type. Our penal operations have been structured around the prisoner who is basically a loyal American and is looking forward to his release from prison in order to return to our kind of society, Galati wrote. Rooted in liberal notions of rehabilitation, this idea has served penal authorities in the past but became outmoded. As Galati saw it, state actors were now dealing with a new type of totally recalcitrant prisoner, one who disowns his country and preaches revolution. In his view, Attica illuminated the grave danger in mixing these two kinds of prisoners, offering a solution he suggested that those who consider themselves political prisoners should be taken at their word and placed among their peers in a special facility. Asserting the imperative of prison reform, he added that this special facility would require an entirely new penal approach discreetly tailored to meet the custodial requirements of these political prisoners. A week later, the governor responded, assuring Galati that his idea would be studied carefully. Oh my gosh. In the previous chapter, I analyzed the public-facing yet woefully misunderstood side of the post-Attica counterinsurgency. The mundane ways state actors targeted the prison's captive majority with solicitous reforms that aimed to cleave popular support from the revolt's revolutionary edge. Galati's letter alludes to this strategy, while pointing to the concealed underside of the coin, the collateral techniques aimed at revolutionaries and political prisoners. Although this category, the U.S. political prisoner, does not officially exist, according to the U.S. government, and is eternally contested within the revolutionary left, Galati illuminates its importance unofficially for maintaining control. He and others believed this militant minority might hold the key to forestalling future rebellions. Damn, the way Orisanmi writes this shit is like, I mean, it's reality, but it's the way he writes it does such a good job of bringing out the horror in this. Like, as you listen to me go through these words, you're like, oh shit, it's coming. It's coming. Like something about the tortures that they went through and how they were deliberate in targeting those who were political, those who considered themselves revolutionary, and those who were against the state. So these lies that they feed us about prison being, a rehabilitation center, and that, we need the police to protect us from ourselves. We be killing each other, as the speech goes. But as the speech also goes, the police only become necessary in human society when it's split between those who have and those who ain't got. So these networks of concentration camps, we should be very wary and understand exactly what they are and why we have to tear them the fuck down. I'll keep reading. Tip of the Spear's final chapter examines state-orchestrated assaults on Black revolutionary minds, having already incarcerated insurgent Black bodies, only to learn that physical capture did not equal control. Counterinsurgency experts tried and failed to exterminate insurgent Black knowledge, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and even impulses. They employ techniques that go by a range of imprecise names: behavior modification, coercive persuasion, brainwashing, thought reform, mind control, human programming, and so on. The following pages analyze these clandestine experiments and their mutations across time in ways that reveal how the imperatives behind these initiatives far outlive their official programmatic lives. I also show how the targets of these experiments, a tight group of revolutionary figures associated with the Black Liberation Army, critiqued and resisted this assault. Discussions of prison reform routinely fail to account for the experiences of this class of prisoner, because to do so is to sully sanitized narratives of progress. The secret history offered here further illuminates the prison as a domain of warfare, assailed by multiple layers of captivity and violence. Revolutionaries held captive at the tip of the spear refused to allow the state to reduce them to automatons, vegetables, robots, zombies, and slaves. Unbroken and undeterred, they continued to pursue the radical aspirations their adversaries strove to eradicate. That shit is so fucking heavy. Researching and narrating this chapter necessitated a disloyal and rebellious approach to the archive. I draw on a wealth of rarely examined state records stored in academic repositories and released through litigation and FOIA requests, while also comprehending the profound limitations of these sources. Not only are the agents of this war structurally incentivized to lie and omit critical details about their scandalous methods, but their notions of reality are filtered through elitist, patriarchal, and white supremacist epistemologies. For this reason, I interpret official sources through a Black radical interpretive paradigm, submerging these sources within oral history and previously hidden documents produced and archived by Black revolutionaries. By investing incarcerated, criminalized, and pathologized knowledges with a greater degree of epistemic authority than I do the authorized knowledge of the state, I unlock a hidden terrain of struggle at the heart of this war. Grab some water. I begin by examining the experience of a former political prisoner named Messiah A. Mugmug. I know I butchered that name. My apologies. Who was targeted by the Prescription and Control Program, aka the RX program after Attica. According to New York docs, the RX program provided intensive treatment, in quotes, to safety and security threats and with a history of chronically maladjusted behavior. Although it enjoyed a brief official existence between 1972 and 1973, I reveal the RX program's longer history, including its hidden connections to the military-industrial complex and to the CIA, which have been conducting experiments on what agency director Alan Dulles termed brain warfare in prisons, hospitals, and beyond since the inception of the Cold War. According to the CIA Inspector General, Project MKUltra, the most well-known cryptonym for these experiments, was concerned with the research and development of chemical, biological, and radiological materials capable of employment in clandestine operations to control human behavior. Allegedly, developed to defend against communist brainwashing techniques capable of achieving thought reform, MKUltra was concretely embedded within counterinsurgent carceral regime. God damn. Long-standing practices of carceral domination helped shape these experiments, which in turn helped shape new technologies of carceral war. Technologies currently deployed against captive as well as free, quote-unquote, populations throughout the world. So basically what the fuck I just read is all these programs that we read about, these secret, mind control programs that we like to read about that circulate around like the conspiracy theories and shit. That I like the way that he words all these programs that were opposed upon these rebels, these revolutionaries, the people who choose to revolt on the outside and in, that they know exactly what the fuck that they're doing. And that is why belief in any of these institutions under this white settler colonial state is bullshit. And the ways in which they get us to reinvest in the system every cycle or every year or whatever is only prolonging our oppression. And the sooner that we see what we live in, the reality of what we live in, that we're not poor because of some moral failing. That is how it is designed under capitalism, for the many of us to go without. And then when we accept that, we understand like why a police state is formed, to repress rebellion once those conditions become too much to bear, or the people become politically conscious enough to say, no, we want autonomy for ourselves and we'll do it by any means necessary. So those in power, those who benefit off this slave system, of course, they're going to build institutions and give concessions sometimes when the shit gets too hot to pacify us, to lull us into a sense of comfort, to look at this not as a plantation and an open air prison, but something that we can reform and work with. And that is a fucking trap. Again, when we study prison and prison abolition, I love the way Orisanmi writes this shit. When you study this book and you study the revolts and you listen to the people who took part in it, but also to understand that the state is going to lie and suppress. So we have to understand that since we are in a protracted war, we have to never take face value what the media feeds us about any rebellion, any revolutionary. And again, make sure we listen to those on the margins, which in this case would be those held captive by the state. I'll keep reading. I just love this shit, though. All right. So allegedly developed to defend against communist brainwashing techniques capable of achieving thought reform, MKUltra was concretely embedded within the counterinsurgent carceral regime. Long-standing practices of carceral domination helped shape these experiments, which in turn helped shape new technologies of carceral war, technologies currently deployed against captive as well as free populations throughout the world. Next, I show that although the RX program was discontinued in 1973, the FBI's prison activist surveillance program emerged shortly after and extended this assault on Black revolutionary minds. Despite the storied institutional rivalry between the CIA and the FBI, archival evidence suggests that the two agencies were, to some extent, collaborating on this counter-revolutionary project. I had to get some water. A 1951 CIA document entitled Organization of the Special Defense Interrogation Program, a precursor to MK-Ultra, indicates that liaison with the FBI on this subject may be described as cooperative, although somewhat mutually evasive. So basically what I just read is that the FBI and the CIA, there's documented evidence that suggests that they work together even though they were kind of rivals. I think that's important because a lot of times when people analyze their conditions under white supremacy, we tend to always say, oh, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, when in actuality, no, that motherfucker is your enemy too. And that a lot of times crackers who rival against each other will collab when it comes to the benefit of empire maintaining white hegemony. And we have to remember that. Because a lot of people fall into a sense of, oh, I can choose this over the other when they both serve the same purpose. In 1951, I think I already read that. Oh, here we go. My findings indicate that this cooperation extended at least into the 1970s, the onset of the massive expansion and proliferation of prisons and penal culture in the United States. However, while the RX program and similar behavior modification initiatives strove to directly program, in quotes, the minds of individuals, prison rats was preoccupied with neutralizing revolutionaries who authorities believed were able to program others. So basically, what I read earlier when they talked about that these programs were created and managed by like the CIA and FBI in order to, use techniques of mind control to combat communist mind control. So basically, it's like how I interpret it is that if someone comes and tell you what it takes to get free, that visceral reaction that you have is due to the indoctrination and social engineering of living under white supremacy for so long. That is why that when we see revolutionaries, oftentimes like the parable, if we were to go back to the Bible, of Jesus Christ being killed by the people, that oftentimes revolutionaries are betrayed by their people. And it shows true. Either betrayed and or side with the state. I mean, if we look at the statistics during Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, it shows that at least over 60% of Black people did not agree with them, looked at them as rebel rousers. I know a lot of times we hear the recounting of history and everyone is like, oh yeah, we're 100% on board. We fought for this. And it's like, nah, hold on, niggas. It was actually a lot less. And many of them stood against them outly and proudly and, sided with the state most time, would call the police anytime they saw someone who even looked like a revolutionary or talked that revolutionary shit. So I say all that to say that is by design, because the natural, I tend to believe, inclination of a people, of a being is to want to be free, to have its autonomy. It takes a very long time and a very skilled system and a very violent and repressive system in order to create a human being that would look at its freedom as actual captivity or captivity as freedom. That should make you so fucking angry. Real talk. But I'll keep reading. By the way, I'm mad sick, so I'm just going to take my time in reading this. Let's see. The struggle, I close by examining a hidden contest that extends what I have been calling the Long Attica Revolt into the early 1980s. The struggle involves covert actions employed by New York's Prisacs administrators to prevent Black radical ideas from seizing hold of the captive majority, forestalling what prison-crats claimed was a BLA conspiracy to organize another Attica. By narrating this struggle, I demonstrate that a hidden intelligentsia within the carceral apparatus aimed to decisively conquer the captive population by eradicating the BLA, not as a coherent organization, but as an idea, operating on their flawed theory that the passive majority was being coercively programmed by the militant minority. State actors believed that if they could effectively isolate some of the most intelligent and articulate BLA political prisoners, they could assert total control over populations on both sides of the walls. As I demonstrate, they were wrong, and their project failed spectacularly. Grab some water. It is with some reluctance that I describe these deployments of carceral technology as failed experiments. The carceral system expanded dramatically in the decades following the period under study, an expansion for which order, at least at the surface level, was a precondition. The technologies analyzed here facilitated that order, enabling the state to wage a campaign of counterinsurgency that was largely unknown to people outside the walls. These technologies inflicted intense form of individualized and collective punishment, destroyed lives, and in their constant mutation, contributed to the development of newer and even more dystopian carceral technologies, including contemporary supermax prisons and emerging forms of e-carceration. Moreover, much of what I cover has direct and indirect links to ongoing methods employed in the global war on terror, where techniques that were tested on Black and overwhelmingly Muslim revolutionaries at home were redeployed abroad and vice versa. Guantanamo Bay is the sum total of what they've been doing to Muslims in U.S. prisons for decades, explains BPP BLA, which is, of course, Black Panther Party and Black Liberation Army, veteran Duruba bin Wahad, a key figure in this chapter. So real quick, this is why people say, or most people who want to see, the dismantling of white supremacy and revolution in our lifetime say that our struggles are connected and that an internationalist approach has to be a part of the strategy for liberation. It's because all these fucking empires are tied in helping to maintain each other. And what I mean by that is like when we talk about like Palestine and the Zionists there who are currently occupying Palestine and conducting a 76-year-long genocide against the Palestinians, that when we say that affects us Black people over here in the imperial court and our multi-centuries of an ongoing genocide, which we still live through today, that it's not only because, yes, genocide is wrong, but it's just describing a fact that our police go over there to learn other techniques of repression, and also their police come over here to learn other techniques of repression. These empires sadistically trade back and forth techniques on which to further repress both oppressed populations. So yes, Israel must fall, America must fall, and the entirety of the Western Empire must fall, and white hegemony must be dismantled if we even want to be able to have the freedom to have a mind to create a new world. And I love that how he purposely words things in this way to get us along this thinking, to connect it to our current struggle, which is just an ongoing struggle of the apocalypse of cellular colonialism. And I'll keep going. I open this chapter with Dr. Gelati's letter to Rockefeller for multiple reasons. First, because his content mobilizes a textbook counterinsurgency rationale. A revolutionary minority must be identified and removed from circulation so as to prevent it from, quote unquote, contaminating the broader population. Second, because the biography of its author is representative of the class of well-connected, highly educated, yet generally obscure figures who are responsible for waging this one-directional war. Like many of the figures named in the chapter, Galati cuts his teeth in foreign and domestic theaters of imperial conflict. He was a naval officer during the Korean War, where he served as commander of military and industrial security for the Northeast area. He spent 27 years with the NYPD, eventually becoming a detective with Special Squad Number 1, an elite unit that collaborated with the FBI to counter espionage, sabotage, and subversion. He held 4 degrees, including Doctor of Judicial Science from Brooklyn Law, as well as a certificate from the National Academy of the FBI, and lifetime members to the National Sheriff's Association and the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which played a key role in the global circulation of counterinsurgency knowledge. Sorry, I started tripping over some of the words because my mind is fucking racing, and I'm trying to keep the commentary to a minimum, but it's interesting. Like, as you read it, you start thinking of like the ways all institutions function under white supremacy, and how a lot of the times they'll paint this picture to us, the oppressed, that, oh, actually, we're going against each other. So like you pick a side, and I'll give an example. Culturally, and what I've seen in America is that people laugh at the social sciences that are offered in college, right? Like, oh, you're a bleeding heart liberal, you care, you're morally superior, that kind of rhetoric, or like it's a throwaway degree, you can't make any money in that, woo, right? And yes, those jobs oftentimes do pay very low wages. And then on the flip side, right, we read in the previous chapters the role of the liberal arts and the social sciences in creating programs that were used to repress people who rebelled in Attica and other prison uprisings. So basically what I'm saying is that when we start understanding that every single institution, no matter what they paint it, no matter how they present themselves as the one with more couth, or the one who cares more, even the one that's willing to give concessions, right, that do serve some benefit. At the end of the day, everything that exists and that is given power and that is given authority exists to maintain empire. So there's no changing it from the inside. You have to burn it down in order for us to build anew. So I'm going to keep reading. Galati helped implement a new tool that enhanced the state's capacity to surveil, capture, punish, kill, and study targeted populations. Sorry, I lost my place. Oh, shit. Hold on. I lost my place. Okay, I got it. Galati helped implement a new tool that enhanced the state's capacity to surveil, capture, punish, kill, and study targeted populations. In 1965, Governor Rockefeller appointed him to serve as inaugural director of the New York State Identification and Intelligence System, NYSIIS, the world's first computer system to be employed in a criminal legal context. Then touted as the largest social science database ever assembled, NYSIIS allowed state actors to aggregate and disseminate intelligence across police, court, prison, probation, and parole agencies, using the same emerging technologies that powered counterinsurgency operations in Southeast Asia. NYSIIS became the prototype for criminal justice information systems across the United States, including the FBI's National Crime Information Center. It laid what Galati called a permanent foundation for a more rational, scientific, and truly systemic control of crime and criminals. I hope the question that people who will listen back on this recording will ask is, damn, if they're employing the same tactics they do in warfare in Southeast Asia to colonize and repress people over there, if they're using the same tactics on us, then aren't we in a protracted war now? And the answer would be, fuck yeah. Fuck yeah. So in war, what do you do? Vote? Okay. Although NYSIIS is not a central aspect of this story, the existence of this emerging technology and its presence within the carceral system is critical to understanding the flawed theory undergirding these experiments in state repression. The theory assumes that human beings can be scientifically controlled and programmed like computers. This false idea came into being alongside advances in the computer technology that made NYSIIS possible. When I give an order to a machine, the situation is not essentially different from that which arises when I give an order to a person, wrote Norbert Wiener in The Human Use of the Human Beings, a 1950 volume on a field he termed cybernetics. While this term has fallen into disuse, its imperatives persist, often in unacknowledged ways via cognitive science, a field that came into being as the events described in this chapter unfolded. The counterinsurgency actors who appear in what follows embrace this mechanistic view of human beings as potential automatons. I know I'm mispronouncing that. Rooted in capitalist social relations and patriarchal white supremacy, their ideas stand in direct conflict with those of the Black revolutionaries they targeted, those whose praxis was rooted in collectivized notions of social consciousness, political education, and people's counter-war. This top-down unidirectional? Yeah, that's the word. This top-down unidirectional assault on Black revolutionary minds required its expert administrators to be intimately familiar with the ideas they aimed to annihilate. They paid close attention to developments in Black radical thought both within and beyond prison walls, and constantly updated their methods in response to new formations of insurgency. For example, it is plausible that Dr. Galati drafted his outline for a prison-based counterinsurgency strategy for reading Black Panther Party co-founder Huey P. Newton's essay, Prison, Where Is Thy Victory, in the January 3, 1970 edition of the Black Panther. Although this cannot be proven, analyzing subversive literature was part of Galati's role as an intelligence operative, and the similarities between the two texts are striking. There are two types of prisoners, wrote Newton, while jailed for allegedly killing a police officer. The largest number are those who accept the legitimacy of the assumptions upon which the society is based. The second type were the political prisoners, a minority that rejects those taken for granted assumptions and instead believes that society is corrupt and illegitimate and must be overthrown. Newton argued that the prison as it was then constituted was incapable of achieving victory over their type. On the one hand, members of the captive majority, who Newton calls illegitimate capitalists, learn to participate in prison programs and say the things that the prison authorities want to hear. They appear rehabilitated but continue to engage in criminalized activity upon release. On the other hand, the prison cannot gain a victory over the political prisoner because he has nothing to be rehabilitated from or to. Ultimately, Newton argued that the prisons of the 1970s were doomed to fail because they were capable only of incarcerating people's bodies, not the ideas that propel movements, ideas which circulate among all the people wherever they are. Whether or not they read this text, Galati and others responded to this dynamic by placing greater emphasis on the incarceration, manipulation, and elimination of ideas. Across the United States, Canada, and elsewhere, those tasked with keeping recalcitrant populations contained quietly experimented with a variety of scandalous methods, including sensory deprivation, electroshock therapy, isolation, hypnotism, chemotherapy, psychosurgery, and electrode implementation, and so on. Interestingly, Newton's 1974 essay, The Mind is Flesh, considers advances in the science of behavioral control, and provides a critical revision of his earlier concepts. Have some water. Citing a number of dystopian counterinsurgency projects developed since 1970, he writes, "In order to prevent ourselves from being enslaved by a minority, the majority of us must rigorously insist the new controls of mind not be applied by the few without the prior conscious consent of the many, both as to technique and objective." This next section is called Prescribing Pacification. They wanted to eliminate freedom fighters, to control us physically and mentally, and to transform us into nonviolent, passive, meek, humble, obedient, modern-day slaves. This is how Messiah A. Mugbug, I'm so sorry for butchering that name, explains the goals of the RX program, through which he and others were coerced into becoming test subjects for a wide array of behavior modification technologies during the late 1960s and early 1970s. We were sipping coffee in the living room. Oh, sorry, hold on. We were sipping coffee in the living room of his small apartment, where books, archival documents, African art, and primitive weaponry covered every available surface. Although his remarkable story deserves a full accounting, that task exceeds the scope of this chapter. I wonder why he used the word primitive to describe the weaponry. I don't know, that just caught me off guard because he's very deliberate in his words and the way he phrases things. It's interesting that he would describe weaponry. Oh, well, I wonder. This portrait reveals how far counterinsurgency experts were willing to go to eliminate Black revolutionary thought and behavior, and most importantly, the failure of their experiments and the inviolability of Messiah's spirit. After all, despite enduring a panoply of terror, Messiah never ceased to resist, was never divested of his cognitive autonomy, and somehow manages to smile often. Damn. At the age of 80, he remains a warrior, a teacher, a walking archive of forbidden knowledge that he dispenses freely, but with great care. I think I just thought of why he might have used the word primitive to describe the weapons. I think I'm thinking because he was like African art, that my mind automatically jumped to primitive as in describing the people who made the weaponry instead of the weaponry itself being primitive because it's outdated. That makes more sense. Let me keep going. And hold on. Oh, there we go. In 1960, at the age of 17, Messiah, then known as Sylvester Comoldenly, confessed to raping a white woman. As he tells it, he was leaving a party with a friend when he was accosted by the NYPD, taken to the Rockaway Beach police station, tied to a chair, and viciously beaten. He eventually signed a confession that he could not read because he had not learned how. "I did a lot of soul stuff when I was younger," he told me. "I was a street hustler, a gambler, a dope dealer. I used to burglarize rich people's houses, and I was a bodyguard for a big-time gangster. But I've never raped anyone." He and his family considered fighting the charges, but were dissuaded by a white attorney who told them he had no chance of winning and reminded them that just 5 years earlier, Emmett Till, a 14-year-old Black boy who had allegedly whistled at a white woman, had been brutally lynched in Mississippi. He followed the advice of his counsel, was found guilty, and was sentenced to 15 to 30 years in prison. A legal lynching, as he called it. And he's fucking right. I had to take some water, but also, as we're listening to this book and reading it, I mean, how could we not help but realize that by letting the these networks of concentration camps exist one more day is just a human rights violation. And also, how do we not see the co-signing of cop cities and the expansion of cop cities across the nation by both parties as acts of war or of continuing war against us, the oppressed people? Like, they're building more of these facilities, and they're building cities, especially for cops who are used to capture and take captives and throw them into this system and this network of concentration camps. And as we read the programs they instill and why they do it and who they target, revolution in my lifetime, for real. In the summer of 1961, while behind the walls of Auburn prison, Masai joined the Nation of Islam, inaugurating a process of transformation that drew inspiration from Malcolm X. Like Malcolm, Masai taught himself to read by studying the dictionary and became politicized through an intensive collective program of religious, political, economic, and cultural study. He told me a mind-blowing story about how his connection to Malcolm X goes beyond inspiration, that it was a material connection forged through a grassroots conspiracy to subvert penal authority. According to Masai, on more than one occasion, Malcolm X traveled to Auburn disguised as a Christian minister in order to gain access to Ned X. Hines, aka Hakima, a key figure in Auburn's active NOI contention. Instead of converting Hakima to Christianity, as the authorities believed he was doing, Malcolm would systematically, in his distinctively eloquent way, transmit Black radical ideas to the captive population. Hakima dutifully listened to Malcolm and committed his words to memory. He then returned to his cell and transcribed this verbal enlightenment into writing, blending it with knowledge he obtained from the contraband texts of early Black studies scholar J.A. Rogers. Masai and others would then generate handwritten reproductions of Hakima's transcripts and circulate them throughout Auburn and beyond. So just so those grapple with what I just read, basically, he tells Orisanmi that the way in which he's connected to Malcolm is material because Malcolm used to disguise himself as a Christian preacher, sneak into the prison in that way. And as the guards and, the jail would think, oh, this priest, this Christian preacher is here to convert them to Christianity, in actuality, Malcolm X was radicalizing them. And that his words would then be disseminated through letters and correspondence that the captives created in their underground networks of communication. Then, when we understand like that's what happened, we would see like, oh shit, what are we doing today in order to get free? We could be doing a lot more. This process constituted an illicit material network of Black revolutionary epistemology that reveals the deep roots of the Long Attica Revolt, misrecognizing this social infrastructure as a form of fanatical programming. A 1973 study noted that Black extremism in New York prisons was the result of a schizophrenic thought disorder, as previously believed of a local cultural system to which these Blacks have been systemically indoctrinated. Such systems of cognitive autonomy would have to be destroyed if the state was ever to truly be in control. Again, the word Black extremism sewn up in paperwork back then is interesting because, again, how do they describe people who seek revolution, who rebel? Black extremists. So again, we tend to think that progress has been made and that we somehow live in a less restrictive system than, 200, 300 years ago or whatever. And I beg to differ. I think we live in an even more oppressive system now, and that the war has only intensified. It is us that have been indoctrinated, but also violently repressed mentally as well as physically. in order to see this as anything but an open air prison. Grab some water. In the wake of Malcolm X's state-facilitated assassination by the NOI triggermen, Masai broke with the nation, developing an eclectic political philosophy that drew from global streams of Black radicalism. After studying Mau Mau from within and other texts, he fashioned himself a Mau Mau behind prison walls, organizing formations of underground resistance that solidified their authority through secret oath-taking practices. Masai's embrace of Kenya's specific brand of anti-colonial nationalism is significant given that the British Empire employed a system of prison-based counterinsurgency against the Mau Mau in the 1950s. Moreover, 2 years after Malcolm's assassination, when J. Edgar Hoover laid out the goals of the Bureau's COINTELPRO against Black nationalist hate groups, he drew lessons from the British experience in Kenya. This connection is revealed in the program's primary goal to prevent the coalition of militant Black nationalist groups, because such a coalition might be the first steps toward a real Mau Mau in America, the beginning of a true Black revolution. That is all quotes. And it's really important for me to emphasize those are all quotes, because as we hear people talk about like Project 2025 and other things to be wary of if one candidate is chosen over another, when we read our history, when we study resistance and revolts that happened here in the Imperial Core and across the world, especially in the Global South, we tend to realize that all those who head empire are meant to continue our oppression. Yes, one might choose to be benevolent, I guess you can call it, every now and then by giving certain concessions. But then those concessions are always taken back and you find yourself fighting for the same crumbs over and over and over. Each time it's taken, the crumb gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So I guess what I'm telling you is that most of what they tell us to fear, we have already been living through. That means we should have been fighting yesterday. And fighting is not choosing one oppressor over the other. It's killing them both. Masai's combination of Black radical erudition. So I fucked up that word. So I'm going to just skip it. Masai's combination of Black radical, militant attractability, and charismatic authority represented precisely that which penal authorities aim to study and eradicate. A psychological evaluation from the early 1970s characterizes him as an antagonistically inclined individual who is rigidly resistant to authoritarian order, a rabid racist Black power advocate who displays open defiance and disdain toward constituted authority. During the same period, the Assistant Attorney General noted that Masai's was one of the worst, if not the worst, disciplinary record ever compiled by a New York State prisoner. When I read these characterizations aloud, Masai released a deep, bellowing laugh. These were examples of how the state criminalizes resistance to oppression, he explained. And he's fucking right. Between 1961 and his parole in 1975, Masai endured an unfathomable degree of punishment, terror, and degradation. I've been chained, whipped, gassed, and put through a whole lot of hell while I was incarcerated. He spent a total of 10 years confined in various forms of punitive isolation, much of it in Unit 14, a special housing unit that could only be reached by entering Clinton Prison and then taking an elevator that led to rows of underground cages where authorities could access from the front or the rear. Attorneys from the National Lawyers Guild described how this subterranean zone encouraged sadistic guards to satiate their libidinal, I can't read that word out loud, urges through their captives. The treatment of men in Unit 14 is not explainable simply by political motivations of prison officials, they wrote. The guards truly hate the men in their charge and clearly get some kind of sick thrill out of torturing them. So basically, because I got really tongue-tied, he's describing he's describing how he had to get to Unit 4. And he had to take an elevator down into what he basically describes as sounds like a pits of fucking hell, where it had these cages where they would house human beings. And the cages can be accessed from the front or the rear. And that oftentimes that was used as a gateway for the guards to enact any sadistic punishment your mind can create. I had to pause because it's like, what the fuck are we doing? that this existed and that it continues to exist in different forms, but exists today. Need to burn the fucking prisons for real and burn this fucking colony. Like, can no check pay for this? This is sick. But yeah, that's what he explained. So as he's going through and he sees all this, he's making a note in his mind and then he's retelling it. This person survived this. Like, he named all his torture, witnessing other people getting tortured, seeing that there's this underground, like, cages in which they're kept human beings. Like, imagine living and seeing all that. Man. Among the various forms of torture Masai endured was a carceral technology called the dark hole, a tiny concrete enclosure that, when sealed, is totally devoid of light, and in which there is no plumbing and barely enough space to accommodate an average adult, demonstrating the crouched position he was forced to assume for unknowable lengths of time, often while stripped naked, starved, and forced to experience his own filth. Messiah placed both feet on his reclining leather chair and hugged his knees. This is how I became extreme, he explained while holding this pose. I was conditioned by cruel and unusual punishments. I had to take a deep breath because, man, I be reading this shit and I be getting pissed the fuck off. Because I'm telling y'all, we don't hate. We do not hate the white settler colony enough. Not even close to enough. The fact that they're building more of these prisons. The fact that many of us can point to one of us who has been locked up in various forms. The fact that no politician is hiding their support for the expansion of the police state. The fact that you have some people of the oppressed class being so gleefully supportive of police and supportive of policies that expand the police state. That this can be you or I's reality very, very soon, strictly because we refuse to live on like this. This shit makes me sick. I'll keep reading. The torture inflicted on Messiah and others was part of an evolving regime in which social and behavioral scientists within and beyond the United States were increasingly looking to quote unquote science for methods of subjugation. Previous research has traced the behaviorist turn in prison management to an April 1961 conference entitled The Power to Change Behavior, where James V. Bennett, head of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, invited MIT psychologist Edgar Schein to present on his CIA-sponsored research on techniques of thought reform, brainwashing, and coercive persuasion. Exposing this project's Orientalist orientation, Schein discussed various Asian methods that were said to have cracked the minds of American PWs. My basic argument is this, he told a group of associate wardens. In order to produce marked change of behavior and or attitude, it is necessary to weaken, undermine, or remove the supports to the old patterns of behavior and the old attitudes. A goal that was achieved either by removing the individual physically and preventing any communication with those whom he cares about, or by proving to him